Before I tell you what that serious problem was and how my family's entire world collapsed overnight, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or state in the comments below. I want to see how far this story reaches before it all comes apart. Thank you for being here. Grab a warm cup of coffee, sit back, and listen to the whole story. It was a Tuesday afternoon, right around 2:15 p.m., and the corporate office was quiet enough that I could hear the hum of the air conditioning vents above my desk. I am a senior licensing manager for a major hospitality group. My days are spent reviewing 100-page contracts, ensuring compliance for boutique hotel expansions, and hunting for the hidden loopholes that could cost my company millions. My eyes were burning from staring at a glowing spreadsheet, and my black coffee had long gone cold. When my phone vibrated against the mahogany grain of my desk, I didn't immediately look. I let it buzz. A few seconds later, it buzzed again. Then, the screen lit up with a notification. New voicemail from Dad. Usually, a midday call from my father, Richard, meant a minor, easily solvable crisis. He had forgotten the password to his online banking again. The contractor fixing their guest bathroom was running late, and my father wanted me to call the guy and apply some pressure. He wanted my advice on a medical bill he didn't understand. I sighed, rubbed the bridge of my nose, put my noise-canceling headphones over my ears, and hit play. I expected a long, dramatic sigh. I expected a gruff, slightly annoyed demand for me to call him back immediately because his time was somehow more valuable than mine, despite the fact that I was the one working a 60-hour week. Instead, the audio hissed for a second, and then his voice came through. It wasn't angry. It wasn't elevated. It was completely flat. It was the voice of a man reading a verdict that had already been decided in a room I wasn't invited to. "Don't come back," my father said. The audio clipped slightly. "We're moving on without you." Click. The line went dead. 11 seconds. I stared at the timer on the screen. 0:11. I hit replay. I listened to the slight intake of breath before he spoke. I listened to the background noise, the faint sound of a television playing a daytime talk show, the clinking of a coffee mug being set down on a granite counter. I played it a third time, searching for a crack in his voice, a hint of hesitation, a sign that he was just having a bad day and lashing out. There was nothing, no explanation, no argument preceding it, just a clean, surgical cut. 11 seconds to erase a 34-year-old son from the family ledger. For a moment, the office around me felt entirely removed, like I was watching my own life through a pane of thick, soundproof glass. I didn't throw my phone against the wall. I didn't feel the sudden, hot rush of tears. What I felt was a strange, terrifyingly cold clarity settling deep into my chest. For 12 years, I had been the family's ultimate safety net. I was the fixer. I was the one who absorbed the panic, organized the chaos, and paid the invoices. And now they were moving on without me. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I didn't ask why. I didn't beg for an explanation. I typed 4 letters. Okay. I hit send. Then I went to work. When you spend over a decade serving as the load-bearing pillar for a family's entire financial existence, you don't just know where the money is. You control the pipes it flows through. My father thought he was just banishing an annoying, controlling son. He had absolutely no idea he was evicting his own architect. I minimized my work spreadsheet and opened a new, secure browser tab. I logged into the portal for the Mercer Family Trust. This was the entity I had painstakingly structured years ago. It was funded almost entirely by my own salary, a sacrifice I made to ensure that my parents would never face the indignity of losing their home when my father's health inevitably declined. It was their safety net, their pseudo-inheritance that I was building for them while they were still alive. I navigated to the administrative control panel. The cursor blinked on the screen. With 3 deliberate clicks, I revoked all secondary access. I engaged the emergency freeze protocol. My security credentials locked down the accounts like a steel vault. No disbursements could be made. No checks could be written. No assets could be moved. The trust was entirely sealed before I even thought about taking a sip of my cold coffee. Next, I picked up my desk phone and dialed Dave, my real estate broker. "Matthew, hey." Dave answered, sounding upbeat. "I was just about to call you. The inspection report on the Scottsdale property looks fantastic. Minor roof repair needed, but the seller agreed to credit us. We are right on track to close next Friday. We were buying a beautiful, sun-drenched townhouse in Arizona for my parents' retirement. My down payment, my pristine credit score securing the loan, my name on the title until they paid me back their portion over a decade." "Dave," I said, my voice eerily calm, "cancel the deal. Pull the paperwork right now." Silence stretched on the other end of the line. "Matt, excuse me? We're way past the contingency window. If we walk away right now, you are going to lose the entire earnest money deposit. We're talking thousands of dollars. Did something happen with the inspection I don't know about?" "The inspection is fine," I replied. "The buyers are not. Kill the deal, Dave. Do not proceed. Send me the cancellation forms." "All right," Dave said, his tone shifting to pure business. "I'll have them in your inbox in 10 minutes. I hung up. I pulled up the banking app on my phone. There was a shared support account I had opened 3 years ago, originally intended strictly for my parents' emergency medical copays and prescription costs. Over the years, the boundaries had blurred. It had quietly morphed into a private convenience fund. I scrolled through the recent pending transactions. $150 at a boutique grocery store, a premium streaming service subscription, a charge for a high-end golf apparel shop. I didn't feel angry looking at the charges. I just felt tired. I initiated a transfer, moving the entire remaining balance, down to the last cent, back into my personal checking account. Then I permanently closed the shared card. By dinner time, the financial bridges were entirely burned. I drove home to my apartment, heated up some leftover chicken and rice, and sat on my couch in silence. I didn't watch television. I just watched the city lights through my window, and for the first time in my adult life, I went to sleep without worrying about my family's future. To truly comprehend the magnitude of my father's voicemail, and why my immediate reaction was to dismantle their entire world, you have to understand the foundation of our family dynamic. People absolutely love to preach about family loyalty, forgiveness, and unconditional love, especially when they are standing comfortably on top of an empire you bled to build. I did not learn to be this ruthless in one dramatic afternoon. I learned it over 12 exhausting years of being the son who fixed broken things quietly. My role in the family wasn't assigned to me in some formal meeting. It was assumed by default because I was the only one who didn't panic when things went wrong. It started when I was 22, freshly graduated and working an entry-level corporate job. My father, a proud man who worked in logistics, tore his rotator cuff in a nasty fall. He required surgery, months of physical therapy, and couldn't work overtime. The financial strain hit them like a freight train. My parents were decent people, but they were terrible with money. They lived paycheck to paycheck, funding a middle-class lifestyle on the razor's edge of debt. When the income dropped, the facade crumbled. I remember walking into their house one Sunday and finding my mother, Elaine, crying at the kitchen table. Spread out in front of her were stacks of past due notices, final warning letters from utility companies, and medical bills that looked like phone numbers. My father was sitting in his recliner in the living room, staring blankly at the wall, too paralyzed by his own wounded pride to look at the mess. I didn't yell. I sat down next to my mother, pulled a legal pad from my briefcase, and started sorting the mail into piles. Immediate threat, secondary threat, long-term debt. "I've got this," I told her. And I did. I took over everything. I spent my evenings calling credit card companies to negotiate lower interest rates. I consolidated their debts into a single, manageable loan under my name. I put them on a strict, unyielding budget. To make the numbers work, I passed up a massive promotion at my firm that would have required me to relocate to Chicago. I knew that if I wasn't physically present to manage their mail, balance their checkbook, and oversee their spending, they would instantly sink back into the hole. I took a large percentage of my salary every month and quietly diverted it to pay down their highest interest loans. When the medical bills from the surgery went into collections, I didn't just write a check to make it disappear. I realized that throwing cash at them was like pouring water into a cracked vase. I needed a permanent structure. So, I paid a specialized lawyer to establish the Mercer Family Trust. I became the sole trustee and primary contributor. I funded it meticulously year after year, sacrificing my own luxury, my own vacations, and sometimes my own peace of mind, to ensure that if my father ever lost his job completely, they wouldn't end up living in a motel. I became their personal bank, their accountant, their crisis manager, and their safety net. But there is a dangerous trap in becoming flawlessly competent. When you do the impossible quietly and efficiently, people stop seeing your sacrifices as a gift. They start seeing your help as a standard utility. You become infrastructure. You become the plumbing in the house. Nobody thanks the pipes for bringing fresh water, but the second the faucet runs dry, they kick the walls in anger. The resentment didn't hit me all at once. It was a slow, insidious drip, masked by smiles and familial obligations. Last year, my mother started laying the groundwork for a new demand. They were renting a decent, comfortable apartment in the suburbs, but she hated it. She complained about the neighbors, the lack of a garden, the stairs. She wanted something permanent, a place she could truly call her own for their retirement years. She started sending me links to real estate listings in Scottsdale, Arizona. Small, beautiful townhouses with Spanish tile roofs, community pools, and warm desert air. It would just be so perfect for your father's joints, she would say over the phone, her voice dripping with careful manipulation. A place to finally rest. They had virtually zero savings. Their debt-to-income ratio was atrocious. They could no more qualify for a $400,000 mortgage than they could fly to the moon. Once again, I stepped into the breach. I spent weeks analyzing the market, running the numbers on my own finances. I structured a highly specific, legally binding plan. I would put down the $60,000 required for the down payment. The mortgage would be entirely in my name, leveraging my flawless credit history to secure a remarkably low interest rate. I would be the sole legal owner of the property. In exchange, my parents would live there and pay me a fixed, highly subsidized monthly amount, barely covering the property taxes and a fraction of the mortgage, until they managed to pay off their portion of the equity over a 15-year period. It was a massive financial liability for me. It tied up my capital, heavily impacted my debt-to-income ratio, and essentially handcuffed my own financial future to their longevity. But I did it because I loved them. I did it because I wanted my mother to have her garden, and my father to have a garage to tinker in without a landlord breathing down his neck. I spent hours on the phone with Dave, the agent. I reviewed the HOA documents late into the night. I coordinated the inspections, wired the earnest money, and managed every single tedious detail of the transaction. And while I was sweating over the contracts, my older brother, Carter, was doing what he always did. Absolutely nothing of substance while taking all the credit. Carter is the family's golden child. If I was the architect working in the mud, Carter was the guy who showed up to the ribbon-cutting ceremony in a tailored Italian suit, shook the mayor's hand, and somehow convinced the local newspaper that he designed the building. He had an uncanny, almost sociopathic talent for drifting into a room only after the hard work was completely finished, and speaking with such emotional authority that everyone assumed he had been leading the charge all along. During the Scottsdale townhouse planning phase, I would go over to my parents' apartment for Sunday dinner, exhausted from negotiating with underwriters. Carter would arrive an hour late, driving a leased luxury SUV he couldn't afford. He would pour himself a generous glass of the expensive red wine I had brought, lean back in his chair and hold court. "We really need to make sure the HOA covers exterior maintenance," Carter would say, looking deeply concerned, nodding at my father. "I want you guys relaxing out there, enjoying your retirement, not climbing ladders to fix roofs. I'll make sure that's in the contract." My mother would look at him, her eyes shining with absolute adoration. "That is so incredibly smart, Carter. Thank you so much for looking out for us. You always think of everything." I would sit there, my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached, staring at my plate. I knew for an absolute fact that Carter hadn't contributed a single dollar to the down payment. He hadn't read a single page of the 50-page HOA disclosure that I had annotated the night before. He contributed grand opinions, emotional speeches, and absolutely nothing that could survive a financial audit. Carter always had an ironclad, emotionally manipulative excuse for why his wallet remained tightly shut while his mouth ran constantly. 5 years ago, it was a messy, drawn-out divorce and custody battle that supposedly drained his accounts. Then, it was his kids' college fund that absolutely had to take priority over helping our parents. There was always a tragic, noble reason why he couldn't help, forcing me to shoulder the burden alone. For years, I swallowed the anger. I told myself that my competence was enough. I didn't need their applause or their adoration. I just needed my parents to be secure. But that's the tragic flaw of being the reliable one. In a family ecosystem built on selective memory and denial, your usefulness eventually metastasizes into an entitlement. They slowly forget that you are a human being making sacrifices and start viewing you as a machine that owes them output. You don't notice it happening until someone decides that the machine should keep running, but the person who built it should be thrown away. The voicemail didn't actually blindside me because my father was inherently evil. He wasn't. He was just a weak man, terrified of conflict, who always took the path of least resistance. The voicemail blindsided me because it forced me to realize how effortlessly they had all conspired to confuse my financial support with an unconditional, eternal obligation. But looking back with the cold clarity of hindsight, the warning signs were flashing bright red weeks before the actual phone call. About 20 days before the voicemail, I received a bizarre text message from my cousin Melissa, who lived out in Phoenix. Melissa and I weren't particularly close. We exchanged pleasantries on holidays, nothing more. "Hey Matt," the text read. "Just checking in on you. I heard through the grapevine that you've been under a massive amount of pressure lately at work and with the family stuff. Really hope you're taking care of your mental health. Please let me know if you need to vent. We're all worried." I remember staring at my phone, my brow furrowed. Pressure? Mental health? Worried? I was busy closing the house and managing my job, but I was perfectly fine. I replied with a polite, dismissive text saying I was just working hard. Thanks for checking in. 3 days later, an email arrived in my personal inbox from an old family friend, a woman who had played bridge with my mother for 20 years. It was a long, meandering, deeply patronizing email. She wrote that she was praying for my peace of mind, and explicitly stated she hoped I wasn't making drastic, controlling decisions from a place of severe burnout. Burnout, pressure, mental health, drastic, controlling decisions. The vocabulary was too specific, too polished, and too uniform to be a coincidence. Someone was systematically seeding a narrative among the extended family and social circle. Someone was seasoning the story before the main course was served. At the time, I was too buried in the minutiae of escrow documents and title insurance to connect the dots. I didn't realize that while I was busy securing my parents' future, Carter was busy running a shadow campaign to rewrite my character. He wasn't telling people I was greedy. Greedy is easily disproven by bank statements. Instead, he was telling them I had fundamentally changed. He was whispering that the stress of my high-powered job, combined with managing the family's money, had caused me to snap. He was painting me as unstable, paranoid, and controlling. It was a brilliant strategy in a truly despicable way. If you make wild, aggressive accusations, people get defensive and ask for proof. But gentle, whispered, concerned rumors about someone's declining mental health? That slides right under people's defenses. It invites pity, not scrutiny. I just didn't comprehend the terrifying extent of the betrayal until the sun came up the morning after my father told me to never come back. The morning after I froze the trust, canceled the house deal, and drained the support account, I woke up at exactly 5:30 a.m. I didn't need an alarm. My internal clock was sharp. I walked into the bathroom, turned the shower on until the water was scalding hot, and stepped in. Through the glass door, I could see my phone resting on the vanity counter. The screen was lighting up continuously, vibrating against the marble like an angry insect. The assault began at 6:12 a.m. My father called. The call went to voicemail. 2 minutes later, my mother called. Then Carter. Then two numbers I didn't recognize. I stepped out of the shower, wrapped a towel around my waist, and picked up the phone. 46 missed calls. The text messages were stacking up by the second, a frantic mix of panic, manipulation, and rage. At 8:23 a.m., my mother texted, "Matthew, you are severely overreacting to a simple misunderstanding. Please turn your phone on right now." At 8:27 a.m., she tried a softer approach. "Nobody meant it the way it sounded on that voicemail. Your father was just stressed. We are a family. We don't do this to each other." At 8:31 a.m., the emotional blackmail arrived. "Please call your father before he does something he cannot undo. His blood pressure is through the roof. If he has a heart attack over this, it will be on your conscience." I read the messages while standing in front of my closet, selecting a crisp, navy blue suit. My jaw tightened, and I felt a vein pulse lightly at my temple, but my hands were completely steady as I buttoned my shirt. Look at the audacity. They were still treating me like the obedient, easily manipulated son who would immediately rush in, apologize for their bad behavior, and fix the mess. What exactly did they think I had done to warrant this panic? I hadn't screamed at them. I hadn't driven over to their apartment and thrown their furniture onto the lawn. I hadn't made a single threat. I had simply agreed with my father's mandate. He wanted to move on without me. I just removed my money, my credit, and my legal liability from the equation, forcing their arrogant assumptions to violently collide with reality. I tied a perfect Windsor knot in my tie, slipped on my watch, and walked out the door. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a man who had finally woken up. During my commute to the corporate office, I connected my phone to the car's Bluetooth and began listening to the voicemails. Most of them were white noise. My mother crying. My father demanding I answer the damn phone. Carter leaving a bizarrely aggressive message telling me to stop acting like a child and turn the cards back on. But the voicemail that made me grip the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white came from Daniel Kessler. Kessler was the high-priced estate lawyer who managed the legal filings for the Mercer Family Trust. "Matthew, this is Daniel Kessler." His voice echoed through the car speakers. He sounded tight, professional, but clearly strained, like a man trying to defuse a bomb without the manual. "We have a very serious problem regarding the sudden freeze on the trust accounts and the abruptly canceled property file in Scottsdale. Your parents called my office in a panic. They believed there was an internal family understanding regarding the transition of the trust. Please call me back immediately before this becomes legally complicated." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh that bounced off the windshield. An internal family understanding. I negotiate multi-million-dollar contracts for a living. I speak fluent corporate lawyer. An internal family understanding is the exact phrase a lawyer uses when they realize one of their clients has made massive, life-altering promises they have absolutely zero legal authority to make. It meant that Carter had somehow convinced my parents that once the Scottsdale house was successfully closed, and the trust was fully funded with my money, they could legally edge me out of the administrative control. He had likely sold them a fantasy where he would take over the management of the funds, freeing them from my strict and controlling budgets, allowing them free rein over the money I had bled to save. Carter wanted the keys to the kingdom, but he desperately needed me to finish building the castle and pay the mortgage first. My father's voicemail wasn't a random outburst. It was a premature execution of their plan. He got cocky and pulled the trigger before the ink was dry on the house. By the time I sat at my desk at noon, my phone showed over 70 missed calls. I didn't dial a single one of them. Instead, I called the only man in this entire mess who relied on math instead of emotion. Martin Sloan had been my personal and trust accountant for over a decade. He was a meticulous, gray-haired man who never raised his voice, never wasted a sentence, and kept receipts for absolutely everything. Recently, Carter had been relentlessly pressuring my parents to fire Martin, and switched the trust management to a younger advisory firm run by a guy named Eric Sloan, no relation. Claiming Eric was more modern, more dynamic, and more collaborative. I knew exactly what collaborative meant in Carter's dictionary. Easily manipulated. I met Martin at a quiet, dimly lit coffee shop 3 blocks from my office at 1 p.m. Martin was already sitting in a corner booth, a thick manila folder resting squarely under his folded hands. He didn't offer empty platitudes or ask how I was holding up. He opened the folder, reviewing my documentation of the trust freeze and the canceled escrow. "Matthew," Martin said, his voice dropping to a low, steady timbre that barely carried across the table. "Did someone in your family recently imply that they expected your fiduciary approval role on the trust to be terminated?" I stared at him, the ambient noise of the espresso machines and chatting customers suddenly fading into a dull roar. "What do you mean? Why are you asking me that?" Martin adjusted his glasses and looked me dead in the eye. "Because I received a highly discreet, very specific inquiry exactly 3 weeks ago. Someone called my office asking what the precise legal protocol would be if the acting contributor of the trust, you, became unreliable or emotionally compromised." I stopped breathing for a second. I felt something ice-cold and jagged slide into place right behind my ribs. "Emotionally compromised?" I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Those were the exact words," Martin confirmed, tapping a printed memo in the folder. "Not deceased. Not physically incapacitated. Emotionally compromised. They wanted to know if a majority family vote could temporarily reassign fiduciary control and asset management to another sibling in the event of a severe mental health crisis." 3 weeks ago, long before the voicemail, long before the argument over the Scottsdale house, long before my father told me to never come back, Carter had already been actively exploring legal avenues to strip me of my own money by declaring me mentally unfit to manage it. He had been building a transition plan, a coup d'etat, while sitting across from me at Sunday dinners, drinking my wine, smiling in my face, and asking my opinion on desert property values. The betrayal was so profound, so meticulously calculated, that I didn't even feel hurt anymore. Hurt is an emotion reserved for people who still have hope that a relationship can be salvaged. I felt completely detached. I felt dangerous. "Who made the call, Martin?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. The caller refused to identify themselves, stating they were just asking hypotheticals for future planning, Martin said evenly. But I recognized the voice. It was Carter. I told him that without a court-ordered medical mandate signed by a licensed psychiatrist, attempting to alter the trust direction against your explicit consent constitutes financial fraud. He hung up and didn't call back. I left the coffee shop holding a certified copy of Martin's memo documenting the phone call. It was a powerful piece of circumstantial evidence, but in the brutal arena of family warfare, I needed more than a memo. I needed a smoking gun. I needed a confession in writing. It arrived in my inbox at 3:15 p.m., delivered entirely by accident. Dave, the real estate agent handling the Scottsdale townhouse, sent me an email containing a revised cancellation notice that required my digital signature. Dave was an excellent negotiator, but he was notoriously sloppy with his email replies, often forgetting to scrub previous messages in a chain. I opened the email on my dual monitors. As I scrolled down past the attached PDF, I saw a block of text from a prior thread from earlier that morning. My eyes locked onto the sender's address. It was from Carter. Carter had emailed Dave directly at 7:30 a.m., frantically trying to salvage the multi-$100,000 purchase behind my back after I had pulled the plug. I read the text, and the blood roared in my ears. Dave Carter had written, "Please hold the escrow file and do not process the cancellation. My brother Matthew has stepped away from the family due to some severe emotional instability. He is currently unable to handle financial stress without lashing out erratically. He is not in his right mind. My parents and I are stepping in to assume the contract to ensure he doesn't ruin the deal in a manic state. Please send the transfer and assumption paperwork directly to my email." I read that paragraph 3 times. I read it until the words burned themselves into my retinas. Emotional instability, lashing out erratically, manic state, not in his right mind. There it was, the masterpiece of his betrayal, typed out in black and white. Turn the architect into a liability. Make my father believe he was actually protecting the family's assets by bravely pushing the crazy son out before he could do damage. Make outsiders, like Dave and the extended family, look at my sudden withdrawal from the contract not as a rational response to abuse, but as undeniable proof of Carter's fabricated story. Carter was setting the stage to make himself look like the calm, heroic, responsible son stepping in to save his poor parents from my madness. It was a brilliant plan. It really was. But it hinged entirely on one fatal assumption. He expected me to act exactly like the unstable person he claimed I was. He expected me to call my parents screaming. He expected me to show up at their apartment in a rage, throwing accusations, demanding answers, giving them all the proof they needed to say, "See? Look how crazy he is." Instead, I sat at my desk in the quiet office. I was perfectly still. I highlighted Carter's email, converted the entire thread into a secure PDF, and saved it to my encrypted desktop folder. I wasn't going to yell. Anger is loud, messy, and easily dismissed. I felt an absolute surgical focus. Carter wanted a legal battle for control of my empire? Fine. I was going to give him a public execution. I opened a new email draft. I attached the PDF of Carter's desperate message to the real estate agent. Then, I attached Martin Sloan's signed, written summary of the inquiry regarding my mental fitness. I typed Daniel Kessler's email address into the recipient line, the estate lawyer who had left me that panicked voicemail about the internal family understanding. I didn't write a long, emotional explanation. I didn't defend my sanity. In the body of the email, I wrote exactly 2 sentences. "Daniel, this is why your clients have a serious problem." I hit send. I leaned back in my chair, steepled my fingers, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. Exactly 19 minutes later, my direct, private office line rang. Not my cell phone. My office line. Kessler had tracked down my corporate number. I picked up the receiver on the second ring. "Matthew Mercer." "Mr. Mercer," Kessler said. The tone of his voice had undergone a complete metamorphosis. The patronizing, slightly annoyed lawyer from the morning voicemail was entirely gone. Now, his voice was exceedingly careful, stripped of any assumption that this was just a simple family squabble. He sounded exactly like a man who realized he had just confidently stepped onto a landmine, heard the click, and was terrified to move his foot. "Daniel," I said smoothly, my voice devoid of any emotion, "did you read the attachments I just sent you?" "I did," he replied, clearing his throat nervously. "Mr. Mercer, I think we need to urgently discuss whether your brother represented facts to my office and to your parents that cannot be legally supported." I smiled. It was a cold, tight smile that didn't reach my eyes. Represented facts that cannot be legally supported. That was the absolute nearest a corporate attorney would ever come to saying, "Your brother is a pathological liar who just tried to commit massive financial fraud using my office, without making a formal, actionable accusation that could get him sued." "He represented a fiction, Daniel," I said, my voice dropping an octave, carrying the full weight of my authority. "He attempted to misappropriate funds and hijack a trust by fabricating a medical crisis. And let me make this crystal clear. If your office drafts a single piece of paper, if you file a single motion attempting to bypass my fiduciary control based on his fiction, I will report you to the state bar for participating in fraud before the ink is dry on the page. Are we entirely clear?" "Abundantly clear." Kessler backpedaled so fast I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head. "We represent the trust entity, Matthew, and as the primary funder and sole appointed trustee, your directives are final. We have no intention of altering the structure. I will immediately inform Richard and Elaine that the trust cannot be touched." "You will not inform them of anything," I commanded, slicing through his sentence. "You will not take their calls. You will not give them advice. I will handle my family." You just make sure your files reflect that I am of sound mind, entirely in control, and watching every single move your office makes." I hung up the phone. I had just checkmated Carter's legal strategy and taken absolute control of the narrative. The trap was fully set, the steel jaws pulled back and locked. Now I just needed to herd them into it. At exactly 5 p.m., my cell phone buzzed. It was a text message from my father. I didn't call him to reassure him. I typed out my terms, brutal and non-negotiable. Tomorrow at 7 p.m. Everyone at the house, Carter included. No excuses, no absences. Bring every single version of the story you were given. I will bring the documents. He replied less than a minute later. We will be here. I spent the next 2 hours alone in my office, standing over the heavy-duty corporate printer. I didn't just print the emails from Dave and Martin. I printed the last 12 years of my life. I printed the wire transfer confirmations for the $60,000 down payment on the townhouse, highlighting my name as the sole originator. I printed my signed escrow documents showing I was the exclusive legal buyer. I printed the original trust formation records, highlighting the clauses that proved exactly who funded it and who held the unyielding power of temporary disbursement authority. I printed 30 pages of bank statements from the shared support account, taking a yellow highlighter to every single grocery run, boutique purchase, streaming service subscription, and exorbitant restaurant tab that were never, ever part of any medical emergency support. I organized the papers chronologically. I put them all into sleek, black, hard-backed presentation folders. I drove home. I laid my clothes out for the next day. A dark charcoal suit, a white shirt, a crimson tie. I went to bed, and as I looked up at the ceiling in the dark, I realized something profound. I wasn't nervous. My heart wasn't racing. I wasn't dreading the confrontation at all. I had spent my entire adult life bending over backward, trying to buy my family's peace, trying to prove I was worthy of their respect and their love by quietly fixing their catastrophic mistakes. I had let them treat me like a machine because I was too afraid of losing them. Tomorrow night, I wasn't going to fix anything. I was going to carry the fire into their living room. I was going to burn their comfortable, fabricated illusion to the ground, and I was going to lock the doors and make every single one of them watch it burn. I pulled into the driveway of my parents' apartment complex at exactly 6:55 p.m. The evening air was thick, holding onto the heat of the day. I grabbed the heavy stack of black presentation folders from the passenger seat and walked up the concrete stairs. I didn't knock. I still had my key. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The living room felt like a staging ground for a funeral nobody had agreed to name. My father, Richard, sat at the head of the small dining table. He was wearing a button-down shirt, sitting rigidly upright, trying to project the authority he had thrown away the day before. My mother, Elaine, sat next to him. She looked exhausted, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were entirely white. And then there was Carter. He sat across from them, wearing a casual but expensive sweater, leaning back in his chair with his legs crossed. His wife, Chloe, was sitting next to him, looking deeply uncomfortable. I hadn't explicitly invited Chloe, but her being there made what I was about to do even better. Carter looked up at me as I walked in. He adjusted his posture, lifting his chin, his eyes already rehearsing his lines of innocent concern. Nobody said a word. The silence was absolute. I walked to the table and remained standing. I set the heavy stack of black folders down on the polished wood with a solid thud. I didn't yell. I didn't look angry. I looked directly at my father. "You said you were told things," I said, my voice completely level. "Let's see what you were told, and let's see what is actually real." I opened the first folder and pulled out the primary documents. I slid them across the table. "Exhibit A," I said smoothly. "The wire transfer confirmations and the signed escrow documents for the Scottsdale property. As you can clearly see, my name is the only name on the buyer's agreement. The $60,000 down payment came directly from my personal checking account. There is no family contribution. There is no cosigner." My father stared at the papers. His jaw tightened. I opened the second folder. Exhibit B. The formation records of the Mercer Family Trust. The initial funding, the subsequent monthly deposits, and the legal framework. Again, my signature, my capital. You will not find Carter's name anywhere on these documents, not as a contributor, and certainly not as a trustee. My mother reached out and touched the edge of the paper, her eyes scanning the dense legal text she didn't fully understand, but the numbers were clear enough. I opened the third folder. Exhibit C. 30 pages of bank statements from the medical support account. I highlighted every single transaction from the last 12 months. I looked directly at my mother now. $3,000 at a boutique grocery store. $800 at a golf apparel shop. I don't recall those being prescribed by a cardiologist. Carter finally leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, trying to take control of the room. Matthew, you're being incredibly aggressive. Nobody is denying that you handle the finances. We all appreciate what you do, but everyone is under a massive amount of stress right now, and you are reading way too much into wording. Mom and Dad are just concerned about your well-being. You've been distant. You've been sharp. You canceled their dream home out of nowhere. He spoke with such a smooth, practiced cadence. He sounded exactly like a man trying to talk a jumper off a ledge. He was playing the reasonable, loving brother to absolute perfection. Is that right, Carter? I asked, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. I canceled the house out of nowhere? You did? My father interjected, his voice gruff. You threw a tantrum and pulled the plug on our future without even talking to us. I nodded slowly. Okay, let's talk about the future. I reached into the final black folder. I pulled out the certified memo from Martin Sloan and the printed email thread from Dave, the real estate agent. I placed them perfectly in the center of the table, making sure they were facing my father. Carter, I said, when exactly did I tell you I was experiencing severe emotional instability? The room went dead silent. Chloe turned her head sharply to look at her husband. My mother blinked, confused. Carter's confident posture fractured for a fraction of a second. His eyes darted to the papers, then back to me. I don't know what you're talking about. I said you were stressed. You didn't say stressed, I replied, tapping the paper. Read it, Dad. My father picked up the email printout. He put on his reading glasses. His eyes tracked across the page. I watched the color slowly drain from his face. This is an email Carter sent to my real estate agent yesterday morning. I narrated for the room, making sure every word landed like a hammer. He told my agent that I was suffering from a manic state. He explicitly stated I was not in my right mind, and that he was stepping in to take over the contract to save the family. My father looked up, his expression a mix of profound confusion and rising horror. He looked at Carter. You told the broker Matthew was crazy? Dad, I was trying to save the house. Carter stammered, the smooth veneer completely cracking. His voice pitched higher. He was acting erratic. He locked the accounts. I had to tell the agent something to buy us time before we lost the earnest money. He locked the accounts, I interrupted. After you left me a voicemail telling me to never come back. A voicemail you left because of this. I pointed to the second document. Martin Sloan's memo. 3 weeks ago, I said, the absolute coldness in my voice chilling the room. 3 weeks before any argument. 3 weeks before the house was ready to close. Carter called my accountant. He asked what the legal protocol was to strip me of my fiduciary control over the trust if I became, quote, emotionally compromised. My mother gasped. It was a sharp, painful sound. Her hand flew to her mouth. 3 weeks ago? She whispered. He wasn't protecting you from me, I said, leaning over the table, my eyes locked onto my father's. He was trying to replace me with your permission. He fabricated a story about my mental health so he could legally hijack the trust, steal the inheritance I built for you, and drain the accounts. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The room had reached that terrible, suffocating stillness that families only ever reach when the wrong child finally has undeniable proof. Carter scrambled. That's a lie. Martin misunderstood me. I was asking hypothetical questions for estate planning. Matthew is spinning this because he's a controlling narcissist. He reached for my mother, his ultimate shield. Mom, you know me. You know I would never do that to you. But Elaine Mercer didn't lean toward him. For the first time in 34 years, my mother leaned away. It was a tiny movement, barely a few inches, but in the context of our family, it was a seismic shift. She looked at him, and she finally saw the parasite behind the golden smile. My father stood up so quickly his heavy wooden chair tipped backward and crashed onto the floor. He didn't even look at the chair. He looked at Carter with a kind of stunned, primal disgust I had never seen on his face before. Did you tell me my son wanted us ruined? My father roared, his voice shaking the windows. Did you sit in my living room and tell me he met with lawyers to push us out of our own retirement? Carter shrank back in his seat. Dad, I was just... Did you tell me he called us dead weight? My father demanded, stepping toward him. Carter started crying then. But it wasn't real sorrow. It felt entirely strategic, too neat, a desperate deployment of his final weapon. He looked at Chloe, his wife, expecting her to defend him, expecting her to be the loyal partner. Chloe stood up. Her face was entirely blank, pale and rigid. She had spent the last 5 years listening to Carter complain about how greedy and controlling I was, how I was hoarding the family wealth. You told me the trust was half yours, Chloe said, her voice trembling with absolute fury. You told me the down payment on that house was coming from your kids' college fund that you graciously lent to Matthew. Carter froze. Chloe, please, we can talk about this at home. There is no home, she said bitterly. She didn't make a grand scene. She didn't scream. She picked up her purse from the floor, took one long, devastating look at the man she married, and walked out the front door. The sound of it clicking shut echoed through the silent apartment. My father pointed a trembling finger at the door. Get out. Dad? Carter pleaded, tears streaming down his face. I said get out of my house, my father bellowed. Carter looked at me. He expected me to intervene, to play the peacekeeper like I always did. I just stared back at him, my expression completely blank. He slowly got up from the table, defeated, stripped of his armor, and walked out. The moment the door closed behind him, the illusion shattered entirely. This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment one below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The heavy silence returned the second Carter's footsteps faded down the hallway. My mother began to cry. These weren't the dramatic, performative tears she usually used to redirect sympathy or end an uncomfortable argument. This was a guttural, ugly sobbing. It was the sound of a woman realizing she had actively helped exile the only child who had been carrying her entire future on his back. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently. My father didn't cry. He bent down, picked up the fallen chair, and set it upright. He moved like an old man, like the last hour had aged him a decade. He sat heavily back down at the table and stared at the documents scattered across the wood. He looked at me, the arrogant, dismissive patriarch who had left that 11-second voicemail was gone. I was wrong, he said, his voice raspy and hollow. I let someone else tell me who my son was. I let him play me for a fool. He ran a hand over his face. Matthew, what do we do? What does it take to fix what I broke? That was the question I had been waiting 12 years to hear. Because forgiveness was never going to be the price of my return. Structure was. I wasn't going to accept a tearful apology and go right back to the old arrangement. That would have made everything they put me through completely meaningless. It would have taught them nothing. You can't fix it, Dad, I said quietly. The old way we did things is dead. It's gone. If you want my help, if you want that house, it happens on my terms. Completely on my terms. I opened the final black folder. I pulled out a newly drafted legal agreement I had paid Kessler's office double time to prepare that morning. "I am not going back to being your unappreciated bank," I explained, sliding the contract toward them. "Here are the new rules. They are built to survive tears, guilt, and future revisionist history." My father put his glasses back on. "Number 1, I stated, ticking it off on my fingers. "The Scottsdale townhouse moves forward, but only under my sole ownership. I am granting you notarized lifetime residency rights. Full occupancy, no rent, but you have absolutely zero equitable interest in the property. You cannot borrow against it. You cannot leave it to anyone in a will. And Carter is legally barred from ever stepping foot on the premises." My mother let out a small sob at the mention of Carter's banishment, but she didn't argue. "Number 2, I continued relentlessly. "The trust is being rebuilt with extreme, narrow language. It now includes automatic audit triggers. Furthermore, it contains a permanent exclusion clause. Any family member who attempts misrepresentation to redirect control or access is permanently legally severed from the trust. Carter is already removed. Number 3, the shared support account is permanently closed. It will never reopen as a shared free-for-all. I will cover your agreed-upon medical essentials and emergencies by paying the providers directly. No credit cards. No casual transfers. No mystery spending hidden under family need." I handed my father a pen. "These are the boundaries," I said. "If you cross them, if you try to circumvent them, I will sell the house and dissolve the trust, and you can ask Carter to fund your retirement. Sign it or I walk out that door and I never come back. And this time it will be my choice." My father didn't hesitate. He didn't argue about his pride or his rights as a parent. He took the pen, signed the bottom of every single page, and pushed the document to my mother. She signed it through her tears. 3 days later, Daniel Kessler filed the revised trust documents with the state. 2 days after that, I re-entered the Scottsdale townhouse purchase on my corrected terms. My name only, my money only, my rules stated openly in ink instead of assumed quietly in the background. Carter found out exactly the way I wanted him to find out, through the cold reality of public records and total silence. He tried to log into the trust portal on a Thursday morning and found his access completely wiped. He called Kessler's office and was informed by a receptionist that he was no longer a beneficiary or an authorized party on the account. He called me 12 times in one afternoon. I never answered a single one. Then came the barrage of unhinged text messages. "You stole my family. You poisoned Mom and Dad against me. You think money makes you a god." I didn't reply. I screenshot every single message, saved them to a secure drive, and forwarded them to my attorney to keep on file for the inevitable restraining order if he escalated. But Carter had much bigger problems than me. Chloe wasn't bluffing when she walked out of my parents' apartment. She filed for divorce 2 weeks later. During discovery, her lawyers unearthed the massive financial hole Carter had dug trying to keep up his wealthy facade. He had secretly drained their savings and taken out massive loans against his own car. Chloe fought ruthlessly for primary custody of their children, citing his financial instability and documented history of lying. Relatives who had previously bought into Carter's smooth talking suddenly stopped taking his calls. My cousin Melissa, who had texted me about my mental health, sent me a long, groveling apology email when the actual timelines of Carter's lies came to light. The sympathy he used to harvest so easily completely dried up. He became a ghost in his own family. A month after my father's voicemail, the townhouse in Scottsdale finally closed. I flew down to Arizona alone the morning after the final signing. I unlocked the front door, walked onto the back patio, and looked out at the desert landscape. It was stunning. The air was warm. The sky was a brilliant, unclouded blue. My mother had wanted a small garden out here. My father had wanted a workbench in the garage. I stood there for a long time, realizing that my desire to help them had finally manifested, but the warmth was gone. I had wanted my financial support to mean something mutual, a foundation of respect. Instead, I got something colder but infinitely more durable: clarity. My parents moved in the following weekend. There was no grand celebration. There were no emotional speeches about fresh starts or family unity. There were just moving boxes, a rented truck, and a profound, heavy silence. My father assembled the patio furniture without asking for my help. My mother wiped down kitchen counters that were already spotless because she clearly didn't know what else to do with her hands. Before I left to fly back home, I handed them a final binder. It contained their signed residence agreement, the emergency contact procedures, the updated medical reimbursement process, and a plain English summary of the new trust rules. My father read every page carefully. He looked up at me, his eyes tired. "Do you really need all these locks on the doors, Matthew?" "You proved that I do," I answered simply. "You needed me. You just didn't think that meant you had to protect me, too. Now the paperwork protects me." He nodded slowly. He didn't ask again. Weeks turned into months, and the dynamic settled into its new, rigid shape. The panic demands and vague guilt trips stopped entirely. When my parents called, they asked practical questions about utility setups, homeowners insurance, and finding new doctors in the area. My father grew quieter, humbled by the realization that authority without actual leverage is just noise. Carter, meanwhile, burned out fast. A mutual family friend told me he had tried to pitch a desperate business idea to an uncle on my mother's side. It was some half-baked plan involving a mobile detailing franchise. He asked the uncle for $50,000 in startup capital, painting himself as the tragic victim, the son unfairly cut off from his rightful inheritance by a controlling, vindictive brother. The uncle didn't bite. Carter had already told too many conflicting versions of the story. Liars always forget that consistency is the bedrock of credibility. By the time Carter tried to gather sympathy and cash, the verified facts had long since outrun his fiction. 3 months later, my mother mentioned during a brief phone call that Carter was renting a tiny, run-down duplex outside the city limits and working unpredictable hours for a landscaping company doing manual labor. She said it in a hushed tone, like she desperately wanted me to hear the tragedy in it, hoping I would swoop in and rescue him. I didn't hear tragedy. I heard adulthood. He had a roof over his head. He had a job. He finally had the exact amount of financial support he had once argued everyone should learn to live with. Absolutely none. One Sunday afternoon, almost a year after the confrontation, I was visiting my parents in Scottsdale. We had lived with the new arrangement long enough for it to feel entirely normal. The tension had faded into a polite, functional peace. My father and I were in the garage organizing some tools. He stopped what he was doing, pulled his phone from his pocket, and held it out to me. "There's something I think you should hear," he said quietly. I took the phone. It was a voicemail from Carter. I hit play. Carter's voice filled the small garage. It started full of injured righteousness, complaining about how hard his life was, how unfair the divorce had been. Then it shifted into bargaining. But right near the end, his voice cracked. The arrogant veneer finally stripped away, revealing the desperate truth underneath. "Dad," Carter choked out on the recording, "I just need someone to believe me for once." I handed the phone back to my father. I almost laughed at the profound, poetic cruelty of it. Carter had so precisely described the exact thing he had tried to steal from me. My father didn't replay the message. He deleted it entirely. We stood there in the garage for a second longer than necessary. "I should have believed you before it cost this much," my father said, looking at the concrete floor. It wasn't a cinematic apology. It wasn't a grand redemption arc. It was just true. It did cost that much. It cost me the last naive illusions I had about what family love automatically protects. It cost my parents the fantasy that they could comfortably enjoy my stability while actively entertaining Carter's sabotage. It cost Carter the unearned access he deeply believed he was entitled to. And that was the ending that mattered the most. Not that I kept my money. Not that the trust was back under my absolute control. What mattered was that the door my father slammed shut with that 11-second voicemail did not reopen the way he expected. I did come back. But I did not come back as the son who could be dismissed, abused, and then casually summoned when the bills came due. I came back as the man who wrote the rules. The house is protected. My parents' retirement is protected. The trust is permanently audit-locked. My phone is quiet. Carter has absolutely no route back in. If you ask me whether I forgive my parents, the answer is a lot more complicated than people like to admit. I support them. I speak to them. I visit them. But I do not trust them the way I once did. And that is not bitterness. That is memory with boundaries. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it's a heavy one, but I hope this resonated with you in some way. Family dynamics are rarely as simple as they look from the outside, and sometimes, setting the hardest boundaries is the only way to survive. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation where you had to walk away to protect yourself? Let me know your experiences in the comments. If you've made it all the way to this exact moment, I have a special request just for you. Comment the letter W below. W stands for winner. This is the secret code for the 1% Club, the amazing group of you who watch these stories until the very final second. It lets me know who my truest supporters are. If you appreciated this story, please hit that like button and follow the channel so we can keep going on these journeys together. Take care of yourselves, set your boundaries, and I'll see you in the next one.